Hey everyone, it's April here. I am back with the mood lighting again. I don't know. My son told me it's the way I use my technology. He said, "You just destroy laptops." I have other ones, so the next time it'll be clear. But this is Wonder Woman. It's my faithful. Uh, I usually use it to edit and do all kinds of stuff. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Don't stop storytelling. This episode is about grief. It's about that uncomfortable subject that people tend to try to avoid oftentimes even in their own lives or discussing with others. You don't want to be a Debbie Downer or to really get into it. People share the TMI oversharing and all that kind of stuff. But grief is a reality and a present part of everyday life. And I remember hearing it's kind of a funny, not funny joke. Someone said this yesterday. He said, "Well, guess what?" He said, "At the end of the story, nobody makes it." I'm like, "Oh my gosh." But what it is that he was just saying that we all go through the same life cycle of birth, our personal evolution and then passing on, transitioning, dying, whatever you want to call it. But there's different types of grief that happen at different times, right? But the reason why grief to me is so important is storytelling. And I think I mentioned it a couple episodes ago when I was talking about something else, excuse me. Um, but the reason why I think it is so important is because it's one of those emotions that helps to bridge the gap of understanding. Um, I think when people think about a war scenario and they're thinking we're going to win, we're going to dominate, for example, that there's winners and there's losers, or when you start dividing and annihilating groups, putting them in separate places and saying that they don't have value or start depreciating them, that it's a really dangerous place to be in because the lack of empathy also comes from, to me, a lack of understanding about grief or imagining what it's like to grieve from their perspective or in someone else's shoes, whether it's one to one person or it's an entire community, race, country, culture. I think that grief changes us and can change us in really positive and powerful ways. I know that for me, I've had a lot of grief in my life from a number of things, and I often talk on social media and different places about hospice and losing people in different ways. And I remember some of the connections even from just even my first hospice experience, or not, it wasn't even my first when I think about it, but just like one, using that as a a further example. But I remember being in the hospital with my dad, and he's just somebody that I like. He was like my best friend. I loved him so immensely, and so it was really hard in a period of 7 weeks finding out what was going on with him, and then realizing that he was going to die, and the first thing was when I finally got to the hospital was let me back up. Part of the reason why I'm telling you this aspect of the story is because I'm at a stage and place that I can tell that story myself. So, but I decided not to. I decided to write it in a play form and maybe a screenplay form, so that I can eventually make a larger film about it. Because I think that the lessons that I learned from just grieving him, because he was so significant to me, um, taught me life lessons and a certain level of compassion for others and how to love others better and love the people that are here, how to connect with others, how to help others grieve in a quiet way, sometimes just by being present or just listening or sitting or showing up and saying nothing or just letting them know that you're available. But I think stories and filmmaking particularly, but any kind of stories, can show us how others grieve so that we can connect with our own. And it can be safe for us to connect with his or her grief or their grief when we couldn't connect with our own, or we were too afraid to go that deep or to process it in a certain way. Seeing it on the screen, whether it's in a sci-fi western, it's a play, it's a dance, it's a piece of music that we can safely play over and over again, and stand back and address in that way from like the third person helps us tremendously. One of the reasons why and I'll go back to my dad's story, but one of the reasons why I liked and love Steven Spielberg is because I not misunderstood. I understood some of the things that he was doing in terms of the technical craftsmanship of his work. Um, I looked at it differently. Everyone thought not everyone. A lot of people thought it was just very big, large scale, and it's, of course phenomenal skill, right? All these complex lenses um, and the ways that he would pull you into into the story. But I felt that the intentionality also was that when you look at the combination of the stories that he was telling and the techniques that he was marrying together, is that he had a powerful, one of the things I appreciated with him is he had a powerful way of bringing you into a story and helping you understand things that cross cultural barriers, ageism, and all these things, because you almost felt like you were sitting in the story, as if the story was happening to you. You were in the room. You know, whether it's A Color Purple or Schindler's List or how many other stories that he told, you felt like you were like, these are your people. These are, you know, and we're all part of the human race, but you felt like you were not a voyeur, but you were a participant. At least I did. And I feel like that stories about grief are really important, because all the things going around in the world, the scariest thing for me to see is the disconnect between people not being able to respond to others' grief or having a certain amount of sympathy or empathy on a certain level. And I feel like I strongly believe that film is a safe way to be able to teach you to do that. Storytelling is a safe way, whether it's a book, it's a play, it's music, it's, you know, it's an opera. And, you know, I've cried and released things in all of these different formats, seeing different, you know, and having participated in so many different art forms. Even you know, paintings. There's certain paintings that move you in such a powerful way. And I remember one of the things I was saying, going back to what I was saying earlier, with my own father passing in hospice, and we were in a hospital, and there was one of the things that was really interesting is that there were all these people in the hospital that were different communities, of course, and cultures that normally would not have necessarily had conversations or connection with one another. And I remember just sitting in the hallways at different times, looking at people and head nodding. Whether it was someone, and these are all people that I normally just speak to anyway, but it was the story behind it is that grief doesn't have a singular face. So I remember one night I was sitting with a Hasidic woman, and we were talking about, she was like, yeah, you know, she was there with her husband, and she's like, yeah, I see you're here with your dad and you're so young. And we were talking about all these things, and how we instantly knew each other's language. Like, it was just like, we just kind of like sat there and like kind of like grabbed hands, and I would look for her every day. And then there was just so many different people from, like I said, different ages, races, places, and we would connect. And sometimes there's a disconnect, you know, because I was in the bathroom complaining about my dad. And one woman, she expressed her grief on me. And I allowed her, because her son was 21 and he was dying of brain cancer. And she's like, your dad, how old is he? He's in his 70s, but my son is only 21 and I have to bury him. And it was so heartbreaking, and I cried for her. And then I realized, I was like, you know what? It's not like as if her story trumped mine or my grief, but there's also showed me there's different ways of looking at that story and that landscape, you know? And grief also, in a story, in terms of storytelling sense, there's so many different ways that you can tell about it. You can talk about it, right? You can make the villain, and animation does a phenomenal job, because there's so much attention to story, detail, and character development. But you might see, a villain or anti-hero, and they've done all these things, and in the end, you find that they were grieving a toy, a relationship, something that they lost, and grief was expressed as anger. Or, you know, you can look at even an older film or older story like The Great Gatsby, or something really that's been a classic forever, and look at how people will use wealth to cover up their grief. Or you can see crime dramas, or all these things, and what grief can look like from every emotion possible. But when you layer it, when you start removing the layers, you realize that there's sadness. And at the end of the day, we need more people telling stories that just don't have everyone cheering. They're not begging for attention, but they're begging for solitude. They're begging for reflection, for personal experience, for you to pour your heart in and tell things that most people don't know, so that they can connect, so they have the opportunity to heal. A lot of people that have been through hospice, they know that you would know that they give you a box. Let's say you bring your relative or loved one home, and they give you a box of medicine, And they can tell you that I remember one of the things I had to grieve within that process is they were telling me, I said, well, what do I give him? You want me to give him this, you have all these, I mean, it's complicated stuff and all this medicine. I'm like, well, what dose, and they're telling me the doses and this, that, and the other. And at the end of the day, the nurse is like, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, what? She's like, he's dying anyway. That, I had to grieve that for a long time. Just that, like, oh, no matter what I do, it doesn't matter. So I had to then find what I could do, how I could feel, rely on my faith, as well as rely on people that were very healthy to support me in therapy, to know what I could do for him in a process like this, what I could do for myself, what I could do for my kids. And one of the things that happened at the end of the process when my dad passed, we had art therapy, a music therapy, and the kids and I were brought together, and we created music together with this music therapist and celebrated my dad's role in the family, even though he was absent, that he was still part of the family. And that was powerful. And that's a movie all in itself. You could just make a movie off of any snippet, any piece of things. You don't have to go into a long, drawn out story about all the things, but there are many stories within just my dad's story. There are many stories within your family or your experience. There are many stories within snippets. And what about the grief that the teaching artist might feel from constantly working in those spaces, even trying to support people, and trying to bring light where there's rain? There's so many stories there. But I believe that stories about grief, that include grief, that are honest about grief, that strip off all the pretense, those are some of the most powerful stories. And I won't name the films, but they're some of the most powerful stories that I've ever seen. And they're so deeply needed, because I do believe that when we understand each other in deeper connection, authentic connection, we can understand the world and we can change the world one story at a time. All right, that's it for this episode. Take care, and don't stop telling stories. Don't stop storytelling about grief. Yeah, thanks.